Imagine standing in front of your people after being publicly beaten, your body barely steady, knowing the punishment is not over. You think this ends with you. It doesn't. Imperial soldiers are already moving past you. They are not there to restore order. They are not there to make arrests. They are reaching for your daughters while you are still standing in the open. You were a ruler. You were an ally. You followed imperial law. None of it matters now. There is no trial. There is no charge. This is happening in public where everyone can see it. The crowd has gone silent, not because they're confused, but because they know exactly what is about to happen. This is where the Empire expected you to submit. This is where a mother was supposed to break. This isn't fiction. This happened. Imperial chroniclers recorded it using the fewest words possible because, even by their standards, what followed was difficult to write down. By the end of that day, the Empire believed the western provinces had been broken. Instead, it triggered a rebellion that burned imperial cities and nearly forced the state to abandon the region entirely. But that rebellion comes later. Before the provinces burned, the Empire had already perfected how to deal with defeated queens. And this is where that lesson begins. If hidden horrors of the past fascinate you, subscribe to Sinister Empires. Hit the like button. And once you reach the moment that unsettles you most, tell me where you're watching from. Let's begin. You are being marched forward through the streets of Aurelia. Imperial guards flank you on both sides, controlling your pace, forcing you to keep moving as your body strains against the weight dragging at your arms. You are not allowed to hurry. You are not allowed to stop. The chain locked around your wrists is cold against your skin and unmistakably gilded. It catches the light as you move, pulling the crowd's attention with every step. It is not designed to stop you from running. It is designed to make sure no one looks away. The weight pulls at your shoulders before the pain reaches your legs, and you understand the purpose immediately. You are not being restrained. You are being displayed. You hear the crowd before you see them. Thousands of voices layered together. Laughter, shouting, anticipation. This is not the sound of execution. They are excited, and that is when the fear sets in. The Empire kills its enemies quickly when it wants them gone. When it keeps you alive, it is because your body still has a use. You lower your eyes, not in submission, but because whatever waits at the end of the road has already been decided. You just don't know what it is yet. Waiting is part of the punishment. Then the perspective widens. This didn't happen to you alone. This happened to Queen Althea of Serapion in 274 CE, when she was 34 years old. The imperial legions finally caught her. For years, Althea had done what no Eastern sovereign dared. She challenged the empire openly. She carved out a dominion stretching from the southern deserts through the river cities and deep into highlands of the north. She ruled in her own name, minted her own coins, commanded armies, and forced the empire to treat her as more than a disposable client ruler. When Emperor Valerianus marched east, it was not to negotiate. It was to erase her. Althea knew how imperial wars ended. She had seen the triumphs. She knew what happened to defeated kings. When her final army collapsed near Seleucian Orontes and her last escape toward Parthia failed, she did not expect mercy. She expected execution. Instead, imperial soldiers surrounded her and did not raise their swords. That alone was terrifying. The empire spared enemies only when it had something to gain. And Althea was valuable, not as a woman, not as a queen, but as a symbol. Valerianus had crushed a defiant dominion. Now, he needed the capital to see it. Althea was placed in custody, but not comfort. Days passed, then weeks. She was moved between guards and holding chambers, watched, isolated. No sentence was announced. No charge was read under imperial law. The moment her army fell, Althea ceased to exist as a legal person. Defeat did not mean punishment. It meant transformation. The ius gentium, the empire's so-called law of nations, held that anyone captured in war became property. Free people became possessions the moment defeat was declared. Titles evaporated. Crowns meant nothing. A queen now had no more legal standing than the lowest foot soldier taken alive on the battlefield, and the empire did not explain what would happen next. During captivity, Althea would have heard rumors. Some captives vanished before triumphs ever took place. Others were kept alive only long enough to be displayed, then quietly removed. When word finally came, it did not announce execution. It announced preparation. The Senate had granted Valerianus a triumph. This was the moment Althea understood what the empire intended to do with her. An imperial triumph was not simply a parade. It was a public ritual of domination. It turned conquest into spectacle. And at its center were always the defeated, prisoners of war, captured generals, fallen kings, and queens. Althea would not be killed in a cell away from witnesses. She would be preserved, dressed, adorned, displayed. Her body would tell a story the empire wanted remembered. In the days before the triumph, the city prepared. Banners were raised, statues cleaned, streets cleared from the field of triumphs, through the Great Forum and up toward Citadel Hill. Nearly 4 kilometers of exposure, for kilometers of faces. Chains were commissioned specifically for Althea. Not iron, gold, heavy, decorative, impossible to ignore. They were not meant to stop escape. The empire knew she would not run. They were meant to turn the wealth she once commanded into the instrument of her humiliation. As the day approached, the city buzzed. Crowds speculated. Would Valerianus execute her at the end? Would she be dragged away mid-route, vanish beneath Citadel Hill, swallowed by the prison carved into the rock below? No one knew. Some captives completed the walk and lived. Others were diverted quietly before the final ascent. That possibility weighed heavier than the chains themselves. Althea, according to later accounts, held herself with composure. She did not beg. She did not collapse. She did not scream. That restraint unsettled the imperial audience, because the empire expected defeated queens to break. Althea's survival was not guaranteed. It was being evaluated. Her life hung not on justice, but on usefulness. And she was not the first woman to learn this. Across the empire, imperial power had already perfected what happened when queens trusted law, status, or loyalty to protect them. The fate waiting for them was not written in codes. It was written in bodies. And in what came next, humiliation would not produce silence. It would produce fire. Althea did not yet walk the streets of Aurelia. Before the city saw her, the empire prepared her. And that preparation began not with chains, but with law. Imperial power did not rely on chaos. It relied on rules. Rules designed to protect citizens, and rules designed to abandon everyone else. Once Althea was captured, she crossed an invisible line. On one side stood citizens shielded by centuries of legal privilege. On the other stood enemies of the empire. She belonged entirely to the second category. Under imperial law, defeat erased identity. The moment her army fell, Althea of Serapion ceased to exist as a legal individual. She was no longer a ruler, no longer an ally, no longer even a person protected by law. This distinction mattered. A citizen could not be flogged without trial. To bind a citizen without due process was scandalous. To execute one without appeal could trigger unrest. Imperial bodies were protected because imperial power depended on citizens believing the state guarded them. Althea's body did not qualify. She was not a citizen. She was not imperial. She was not, legally speaking, a queen anymore. Imperial officials understood exactly what that allowed them to do. While Althea waited, confined and watched, the empire decided how to use her, not whether she would live or die. That would come later, but how she would be transformed into a lesson. Captured rulers were often held in deliberate limbo before triumphs, not tortured, not comforted, simply denied information. They were moved between holding chambers. Guards rotated. Sleep was disrupted. Food was rationed. Nothing severe enough to provoke outrage, just enough to drain certainty. Would there be execution? Ransom? Public display? A quiet disappearance? No one told her. And while Althea waited, the Empire prepared the city. Rumors spread deliberately. People whispered about her defiance, her ambition, her arrogance. The Empire wanted the crowd ready long before she appeared. By the time she stepped into view, the audience would already know how to feel. The triumph, once announced, became unavoidable. An imperial triumph was not automatic. It required Senate approval, a signal that the state had decided the enemy's humiliation was useful. The procession followed a fixed route, but nothing about it was neutral. Every detail was arranged to shape how victory would be remembered. Musicians led the way, their noise filling the streets. Painted scenes of burning cities, and fleeing enemies followed. Exotic animals were dragged to the crowd, proof that distant worlds had been conquered and reduced. Only after this display came the prisoners. They were the proof. Captured soldiers walked in chains, their defiance already stripped away. At the front of the column walked the rulers, kings, princes, and queens. Their clothing was often left intact. The Empire did not want to erase who they had been. It wanted to show what conquest did to power. Althea would not be stripped of identity. She would be forced to carry it. For kilometers is a long distance when you are exhausted, bound, and exposed. The procession moved slowly, stopping often so the crowd could watch. Spectators leaned from balconies. Children were lifted onto shoulders. Vendors sold food while people laughed and pointed. This was not hatred. It was enjoyment. For the citizens of Aurelia, triumphs were entertainment, proof that their empire expanded, proof that threats could be crushed. For captives, every step was exposure. There was no way to hide fear, no way to avoid eye contact. Every stumble was noticed, every pause judged, and at any moment, the route could change. Not every captive completed the triumph. Some rulers were diverted before the final ascent to Citadel Hill. While the procession continued toward the Temple of Jupiter, guards led the condemned away through secure doors down side streets toward the slope beneath the hill, toward the prison. The music above continued. Cheers rose. Sacrifices were offered. Aurelia celebrated. Below, execution waited. Every captive knew this possibility existed. Althea walked knowing it, too. She also knew something else. The Empire had done worse to women who trusted restraint. In the provinces, defeated women were often treated as spoils of war. This was not an aberration. It was expectation. Military culture, hardened by conquest, viewed defeated families as tools of domination. Delay did not mean protection. It meant postponement. Althea's royal status shielded her temporarily, but only because the Empire still needed her intact. Others were not so fortunate. Across the territories, noble women lost protection the moment their male guardians fell. Their bodies became leverage. Violating a ruler's family sent a message that traveled faster than legions. Nothing you value was safe. Althea's survival depended entirely on how useful her humiliation proved. If she broke, if she pleaded or collapsed, execution would follow. Broken rulers no longer served as warnings. If she endured, if she remained composed, she might live, not as herself, but as a reminder. Valerianus understood this calculus. He was not known for mercy. He was known for order. Althea's fate would reflect imperial priorities, not compassion. As the triumph day approached, the city waited. So did Althea. She had already lost her dominion. Her armies were gone, her authority erased. Now the Empire would decide whether her body would vanish beneath Citadel Hill or walk the streets as proof that resistance ended here. And while Althea waited, another queen far from Aurelia was about to learn the same lesson. She trusted imperial law, and the Empire would teach her why that was a mistake. Althea stepped into Aurelia. The noise at first, not a roar, something worse, a rolling sound made of laughter, shouting, and curiosity sharpened into hunger. This was not a crowd waiting for justice. It was a crowd waiting to see something. She was adorned. Jewels flashed at her throat and wrists. Fabric dyed in colors only royalty could once afford clung to her body, wrapped around her, cutting into skin already weakened by captivity. Were the chains gold? Not symbolic, not light. Massive links that pulled her shoulders forward, forcing a posture just short of collapse. Guards walked beside her, not to restrain her, but to help bear the weight. The Empire had turned her wealth into her burden. The crowd understood immediately. They pointed. They murmured. They laughed. This is what happens to queens. Althea did not scream. That unsettled them. She walked slowly, deliberately, refusing to rush. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. She did not lower her head. She did not look for mercy. She looked straight ahead. This composure was dangerous. Humiliation is meant to break people. When it doesn't, the Empire adapts. Musicians played. Incense burned. The city displayed itself as the center of the world. Althea's body became the boundary between imperial power and remembered defiance. Valerianus watched, not with pity, but with calculation. Killing Althea would be simple, effective, final, but it would end the story too quickly. The Empire did not always want endings. Sometimes it wanted reminders. A living queen, reduced but breathing, spoke longer than a corpse. Althea survived the day. That decision, often called mercy, was not kindness. It was strategy. She was granted a villa near Aurelia. She lived under watch. She was absorbed into imperial society. Her daughters married into noble families. On paper, she survived. In reality, she had been neutralized. Every appearance reinforced the Empire's victory. Every sight of her reminded observers that even the most powerful woman in the East ended dependent on imperial tolerance. Althea became a warning that walked. But not every queen broke quietly. Far from Aurelia, in the cold province of Britannia, another woman watched imperial law fail her in real time. Her name was Boudica. She was not the Empire's enemy. Not yet. She was the wife of Pursutus, king of the Iceni, a client ruler permitted to govern so long as he obeyed. He paid tribute. He kept peace. He believed imperial promises meant something. When Prasutagragras died around 60 CE, he tried to protect his family the only way imperial law allowed. He left a will, half his kingdom to Emperor Nero, half to his daughters. A compromise, a mistake. Imperial officials ignored it. The lands were seized. Property confiscated, noble families dispossessed. The Empire did not negotiate. It took. Boudica protested. She did not raise an army. She did not declare rebellion. She appealed publicly to the agreement the Empire itself had approved. This is when the Empire clarified what law meant for women without citizenship. Boudica was seized. Not privately, publicly. She was flogged. The punishment alone was a violation. Citizens were protected from corporal punishment. Even allied elites were usually spared such degradation. To beat a queen was not enforcement. It was instruction. And the Empire was not finished. Her daughters, young, unmarried, unprotected, were taken. Ancient historians rarely describe what follows in detail. Tacitus uses few words, but the meaning is unmistakable. They were violated by imperial soldiers. This was not random violence. It was calculated humiliation. The Empire understood that conquering a ruler's body was powerful. Conquering her children was devastating, and it was done in view of her people. The Iceni were meant to see this, to understand that resistance did not end only in death, but in the destruction of lineage. The Empire believed this would end the problem. It was wrong. Something in Boudica fractured and hardened. The flogging did not silence her. The violation of her daughters did not break her. It transformed her. When she spoke again, it was not to imperial officials. It was to her people. Tacitus preserves a version of her words. He records her not as a ruler pleading for sovereignty, but as a woman demanding vengeance. She spoke of her body, of her daughters, of what the empire had done. This mattered. The empire could crush kings. It struggled against rage that no longer feared loss. Boudica raised an army, not trained, not disciplined, furious. The empire was caught off guard. Camelation burned first, then Londinium, then Verulamium. Cities were razed. Tens of thousands were killed. Imperial authority collapsed across the province. For a moment, the empire hesitated. This was the cost of humiliation miscalculated. Eventually, the empire responded the way it always did. Discipline, formation, steel. Boudica's forces were defeated in a battle whose location history does not preserve. She disappeared. Some accounts say she poisoned herself rather than face capture. Others fall silent. Her daughters vanished completely. Their names were not recorded. Their lives were not followed. Their fate after the empire used them to deliver its message is not preserved. Silence closed over them. Order was restored. Britannia remained imperial. The rebellion became a lesson, not about cruelty, but about control. In Aurelia, triumphs continued. Some queens lived as reminders. Others vanished beneath the city. Some stories were told, others erased. The pattern was clear. When humiliation worked, the empire preserved you. When it failed, the empire destroyed everything you touched. And beneath the marble, beneath the music and celebration, one last place waited for those who were no longer useful. A place where triumphs ended. While crowds watched generals ascend Citadel Hill to thank Jupiter for conquest, something else happened nearby. Cut directly into the rock beneath the hill stood the Mamertine prison, the Tullenum. It did not announce itself. No banners, no inscriptions, no celebration, just stone. Inside it was worse. The prison consisted of 2 chambers. The upper level held prisoners briefly. The lower chamber, the end, was reached only through a hole in the floor. Prisoners were lowered down or thrown. Once inside, there was no light, no ventilation, no escape. This was not a place meant for holding people. It was a place meant for ending them. Execution did not always come quickly. Some prisoners were strangled, others suffocated. Some were left to starve, their voices fading while celebrations echoed above. This separation was deliberate. The empire did not want blood in its triumphs. It wanted victory undisturbed by visible death. Killing happened out of sight, while the celebration continued uninterrupted. Vercingetorix learned this slowly. The chieftain who unified tribes against Julius Caesar was not executed after his defeat at Alesia in 52 BCE. He was imprisoned for 6 years. 6 years of waiting. 6 years of knowing his life had been paused, not spared. When Caesar celebrated his triumph in 46 BCE, Vercingetorix was paraded through the city. Not a warrior anymore, but a reminder. After the procession ended, he was led away. The crowd never saw him again. Jugurtha of Numidia met a similar end. After Marius's triumph, he was lowered into the Tullenum. Ancient accounts say he went mad with fear. He lasted 6 days, starving in darkness, unheard by the city above. Simon Bartera, leader of the Jewish revolt, was paraded through Titus's triumph in 71 CE. The procession paused at the temple of Jupiter. Only when word arrived that Simon had been executed did the ceremony resume. Death was not an interruption. It was a checkpoint. Not every ruler was killed. Some were too useful alive. Althea lived, but not as herself. She did not return east. She did not reclaim power. She did not choose her ending. She existed under imperial watch, absorbed into society that had destroyed her authority. Her survival reassured the empire's enemies that resistance ended in dependency, not redemption. Living queens became monuments. Dead ones became warnings. Both served the same purpose. This was how the empire functioned. Imperial conquest did not rely on legions alone. It relied on memory, on images carried forward long after battles ended. Queens in chains, daughters violated, kings vanishing beneath stone. Fear traveled faster than armies ever could. The legal protections the empire celebrated applied only within its borders. Outside them, dignity was conditional. Humanity was negotiable. Defeat erased everything. What remains today are fragments. Tacitus's restrained horror, Plutarch's uneasy anecdotes, Josephus's careful records, and the stone walls of the Mamertine prison, still standing, still silent. Tourists walk past them now. Some descend the steps. Few linger. The stones do not explain themselves. They do not need to. They have already done their work. The empire called this order. The empire called this civilization. The empire called this victory. The queens who survived called it something else. If they spoke at all, most did not. And that silence may be the empire's greatest success.